Do you believe that our educational system is on the brink of catastrophic collapse?
I think it's already collapsed. I think, the outcomes that you just inventoried is evidence of a utter collapse of the system. We can fix the system, but you need to do something disruptive.
Which, of course, takes money. And I want to talk about money. When your uncle was president, he seemed to have the idea that a lower tax rate brought about a higher tax revenue. What's your view on that?
I'm not going to raise the tax rates in this country. I may switch around some of the tax burdens to incentivize the best behavior, but I'm not going to raise taxes. We want to lower tax rates as much as possible. We have a $34 trillion debt, and we can't just print money. I saw President Trump on your show, and it was a very amazing, and it was an amazing show, and I think you really bring out the best in people. And I know that's your objective. But he was talking about how strong the economy was during his administration. But he printed $8 trillion, which is more than all presidents combined from George Washington to George W. Bush in 283 years of history. So it's pretty easy to produce the illusion of wealth if you're stealing money from future generations. And printing money like that is just theft. That can't be our solution.
How much has the Biden administration printed?
$6.3 billion today, but they will beat President Trump. Yeah, that's right. What's wrong? And it's addiction to war. It's the chronic disease epidemic, the biggest cost. That's costing us $4.3 trillion. We have to end that. We have to, or we're dead. It's 4.3. It's 5 times our military budget. We've gone from 6% of GDP to healthcare to about 18%. And 6% when my uncle was president, 18% today, and it's growing exponentially. And we spend more on healthcare than any other country in the world, 2 or 3 times per capita what the Europeans, and we're 79th in health outcomes. We're behind Costa Rica, we're behind Mongolia, we're behind Cuba, we're behind Nicaragua.
How is that even possible? There are 50 countries in the world where a mother has a better chance of surviving childbirth than America. 51 countries in the world where the infant has a better chance of surviving than America. America! Yeah. How is that possible,
when
Robert?
You and I were kids, we had the best healthcare system in the world, bar none. Today, we have the worst. We have extraordinary doctors in this country, extraordinary, that are doing things that are incredibly innovative. But we have the worst health outcomes. It's because of chronic disease. And we've got to figure out what's causing it, eliminate it. We have, and it's not rocket science. It's glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. It's neonicotinoid pesticides. It's atrazine. It's PFOAs, the forever chemicals that are in all of our child's pajamas. They're in our furniture. I've litigated on them as well. It's high fructose corn syrup.
These other countries don't have that?
No, if you want to drink a Coke, drink a Mexican Coke, because they don't allow it down there. There's 1,000 ingredients in our food that are banned in Europe. And we're poisoning, we're mass poisoning an entire generation of kids. These kids are obese. It's not because they suddenly got lazy. It's not because we're mass poisoning them. And I, as president, I'm going to put an end to that. I'm going to say we're going to give drug development and infectious disease a little break for 8 years. And we're going to find out why our kids are the sickest kids in the world. Find out why they have diabetes, why they have asthma, why these exponentially are better, larger than any other country in the world.
How do you do that? Everybody wants to hold on. They don't want to get smaller. They want to get bigger. And it's government's going to fix everything. Let's get more government. Let's get bigger government. Let's fix everything.
You have powerful industries like high fructose corn syrup that has millions of farmers who've been sucked into that industry. Those companies have on their payrolls the chair of all the agricultural committees in both houses, and they own the USDA. So the question is, even if you found out that high fructose corn syrup was the cause of, a large cause of the obesity epidemic and diabetes epidemic, could you do anything about it? That's the question. Can you use power? And I know I can do it, and I'll tell you how. And all the things that I promise when I'm running are things that I can do without the help of Congress, because I know how things work, and I know you can't count on Congress anymore. I'm going to go down to NIH, and I'm going to say to them, we're going to find out what's causing these, and we're going to do a lot of science on them. Once you have that science that makes that causal connection between an exposure and an injury, you pass a threshold in the federal court called the Daubert threshold, which allows attorneys to bring lawsuits. When we brought the Monsanto lawsuit, everybody said you can never get Roundup. They're too powerful. The first case we won $289 million on. The second case we won $89 million. The third case, we asked the jury for $1 billion, and they gave us $2.2 billion. And then Monsanto came to the negotiating table, and they agreed to remove glyphosate from home gardening products. You can't do it through Congress. You can do it by generating enough really high quality, good quality science so that the attorneys can come in and do it. And it's the market fixing the problem rather than government.
Yeah. The thing that I'm concerned about is if we're trying to get government to fix all of this, then government's just going to get bigger and bigger and have a bigger role in people's lives and more control in people's lives. And it seems to me that's the last thing we want. If you want something fixed, it seems to me if we let enterprising people work on it, enterprising people try to figure things out, they'll do it faster and cheaper than the government.
So, yeah, and you're right. The service on our debt, now that $34 trillion of debt, incidentally, President Biden is adding another $1 trillion every 90 days. That's the burn rate we have. It's insane. Right now, we're paying more to serve that debt, the interest on that debt, than our military budget. Within 5 years, President Trump and President Biden contributed that debt by thinking it was okay to shut down an economy for 500 days and then just print money.
Well, what do you think about this printing money business? I'm looking at this from the standpoint that I've been contributing to my retirement fund since the 80s on. It just keeps getting smaller and smaller. Isn't that just a tax on people?
Yeah, inflation is a tax, and it's a regressive tax. It taxes people on fixed incomes. It taxes working people. It's theft. It is stealing our money. The politicians don't come to us anymore and say, I'm going to spend $200 billion on Ukraine war, and, will you pay for it in advance by diminishing your expectations in life? They just go to the war. They spend $60 or $100 billion, and then they just print it at the other end. And that is a hidden tax on all of us, and it's a theft of the American people. And, that's another reason we got to unwind the war machine, which is what I'm going to do as president.
Well, you said you would end the war and stop Ukraine suffering.
Yeah.
How?
I negotiate an agreement, a deal with Vladimir Putin, which he's tried repeatedly to do. He gave us 2 deals already and signed one in April of 2022. It was a beautiful deal for our country, a beautiful deal for Ukraine. It would have left Donbass and Lugansk as part of Ukraine. It would have ended the war. The only thing he wanted, and this is what he said from the beginning, is an agreement with all of us to keep NATO out of Ukraine. And Zelensky signed it, and then Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson over to Kiev and forced Zelensky to tear up that agreement. And 600,000 Ukrainian kids have died since then, all of them unnecessarily. My son fought over in Ukraine. My son was in a Foreign Legion squadron, and he fought in the Kharkiv offensive. But all these kids are dead. None of them needed to die. We had an agreement that would have been good for everybody.
You say you're going to cut military spending. Do you think Americans will sit still for that?
I think they're going to welcome it. I'm going to bring the military spending home to our country and start rebuilding our industrial base. We've destroyed the middle class in order to pay for the military spending. That does not make us a more powerful nation. I'm going to make our nation return our moral authority, return our influence in the world, and make us a stronger nation. I'm going to do that by cutting the military. We now have 800 bases abroad. The Russians have 1. The Chinese have 2, one which we built for them in Bagram in Afghanistan. We have 800. We don't need that. We need to protect our borders. We need to protect the sea lanes and the neutral areas, and we can do that. I'm cutting the budget back to what the Eisenhower minimum, in other words, the height of the budget in real 2024 dollars during the Cold War. So if that budget was enough to protect our interests during the height of the Cold War, it's enough now. We've destroyed the middle class in this country, Phil. There's 61% of the people in this country, including a lot of people who watch your show, cannot put their hands on $500 if they have an emergency in their family. There's 60% are living hand to mouth, and they're desperate. They're facing eviction. They're facing starvation, and it's getting worse.
The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred on JFK's watch, and we had a genuine threat in Cuba at the time. And recently, Russia has reportedly moved warships, nuclear submarines, into Havana Harbor. This could potentially be on your plate in November. I mean, this could be history repeating itself.
I do the same thing my uncle did. My father went over to had Ambassador Dobrynin come over to the Justice Department, and they negotiated a deal. Khrushchev had moved those missiles into Cuba, was because we had just put Jupiter missiles in Turkey, right on his border. And he said, well, if you're going to put them over there, we're going to put them on your border. My father said, my uncle had already ordered them out, and the military had defied him. And my uncle and father made a secret deal with Dobrynin. If you move the missiles out of Cuba, we will move the missiles out of Turkey within 6 months, as long as nobody talks about the deal. And that's what they did. Well, Russia's doing the same thing now. We've just put missiles on their border in Poland, and they're nuclear ready. They're not, as far as we know, they're not armed, but they're armed with something else. Those are 12 minutes from Moscow. So we could decapitate the entire Soviet leadership in 12 minutes. If we get NATO, which is Biden's plan, into Ukraine, they'll be 4 minutes from Moscow. So of course the Russians aren't going to allow that any more than we would allow them to put nukes in Cuba. We're closer today to a nuclear war than we were at any time in history since 1962. And it's all just like it was during World War I. It's people in office who are sleepwalking into a conflict that we should have nothing to do with. Nothing.